Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. It's great to see so many of you. Amazing. And we would like to get started by asking you, where are you joining us from? If you wouldn't mind using the chat option to share with us what city, what country, where are you joining us from? Germany, Canada, New York City, Portugal. Wow, so many places: Sweden, Washington, D.C., Toronto, Germany, Oregon, Denver, amazing, Tel Aviv, Mexico. Wow, we have a truly global audience. Thank you so much for joining us live here. So we talk about why human-centered skills are essential to future-proof organizations. That's the topic of today's webinar. And we keep on saying more places. Vietnam, gosh, Amsterdam, Estonia, Mexico, so many different places around the world. Welcome, and welcome, Rich. How are you doing today?
Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm great, thank you. And I'm really happy to see everyone joining us from all corners of the world. So welcome, everyone. And one of the things we like to do here at the Institute is really start things off with a moment to arrive. That's literally what we call it. And what we mean by that is just an invitation to really allow ourselves to kind of connect in the moment with our minds and our bodies and our hearts all in the same place in this moment, in the here and now, rather than the there and then. And so there's nothing too complicated about this. It's just an invitation to take a moment to pause in the course of your day, whether it be the beginning, the middle, or the end of your day, because I know we are from all over the world here in all the different time zones, and just take a moment to arrive with your attention and your intention, for being here today. If you'd like, we'd invite you to close your eyes if you're comfortable, or perhaps just soften your visual field if that feels good to you. Perhaps gazing downward gently, just softening the visual field for a moment as we practice this moment to arrive together. Connecting for a moment with your body. Connecting for a moment with your breathing. Whatever that means for you. Allowing yourself this time and space to ground yourself in this moment. Inviting this kind, gentle attention that may have been scattered throughout the course of the day, but in this moment is here, now, together. And as we continue this practice of arrival, connecting for just a moment with your intention for being here today. And then as we close this practice, this moment to arrive, as we like to call it, inviting 3 slightly deeper breaths at your own pace. And then as you're ready, kind of rejoining if you had your eyes closed, or just looking up again and rejoining all of us together. Thank you so much for that practice. For us, it's always really important to start to put into practice these very qualities of emotional intelligence and mindfulness that we teach. And in fact, if you're not familiar with us here at the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, just a quick word. We have a long name, and that's because we actually originated at Google as a mindfulness and emotional intelligence-based platform for employees, managers, leaders at Google. So the idea is search, but rather than out there, search inside yourself. And then about 10 years ago, we spun off as a separate nonprofit educational institute really focused on the skills of mindfulness and emotional intelligence, but rooted in the understanding and the research of neuroscience and how neuroscience enables us to kind of meet our full potential through these practices and skills of mindfulness and emotional intelligence. If you're wondering, Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, again, long name. If you want to abbreviate it, you can call it SIYLI, SIYLI. We know it's silly to be called SIYLI, but we like to keep it light. So we are happy if you call us SIYLI.org, which is what we're known as. And so just a little bit of quick introduction also for myself and Carolina. I'm Rich Fernandez. I'm the CEO of SIYLI. I'm a psychologist by training, having a PhD there, but I spent my entire career in industry, primarily in financial services, first in New York City, and then the last couple of decades out here based here in the West Coast. I'm in San Francisco, working in tech. In technology. My last role was at Google, where I was the head of the executive education function globally. And after that, started my own little company before coming here to Search Inside Yourself as the CEO. So I'm super happy to be connected back to this kind of body of work that originated at Google, where I was also an employee. And then I'll hand it over to Carolina, because we have some parallels in our own work and life journeys.
We do, don't we, Rich? Yeah, Carolina Lasso. I'm the marketing director here at the Institute, also come from Google. And after many years working in the corporate world, post-MBA, I decided to join our Institute and really focus on bringing more of these human-centered skills to more organizations around the world. Super passionate about that and really excited to share with you what we have to offer for today's webinar. And I would also love to introduce you to Grace, who has been doing a lot of work behind the scenes on all of the research that we are about to share with you and will be supporting us today. So thank you so much for all your support and contributions, Grace. And with that, now that we've introduced ourselves, we would like to hear from you. And the way we're going to do it is as follows. We would like to ask you to think about words that come to mind when you think of a leader you admire. Think about someone you admire in terms of leadership. It can be in your community, in your country, in your family, in your company. And what I'd like to ask you to do is to go to this URL, wooclub.com/searchinside, wooclub.com/searchinside, or you can use the QR code and share with us there as many words as you want. What are those words that come to your mind when you think of a leader you admire? And I'm going to start sharing the results over here. I see empathy, I see vulnerability, amazing. And let's see a few more words coming up. Over the chat over here, I see a few more: service, passionate, innovation. But let's see, the word cloud is beginning to show up. Goodness, so many words. Integrity, vulnerability, brave, selfless, gracious, truth, authenticity, listener, humble, honesty. This is an amazing word cloud. Wow. Structured, presence, self-aware, passion, personable, kind, energetic, willing, a good example, clarity. Woo! Amazing. Thank you. Someone who's brave. Yes. Someone who has a vision, someone who's caring, someone who inspires, someone who's real. All of these are incredible, incredible descriptions. And I would say not just of leaders, but of anyone that we get to spend our time with, whether it's at work or in our personal lives. So thanks for sharing all of that.
You know, what's interesting, Carolina, also, as we all know, that in a word cloud, or if you don't know, in a word cloud, the bigger the word, the more people reporting on that. So it's interesting to see where the weighting of the words and concepts go.
Exactly. And it wouldn't be a surprise to all of you that all of these words, in fact, I would venture to say that more than 90% of these words are related to emotional intelligence, to human-centered skills, right? So it's not something that comes from research and the books and theory. It's something that we feel and we live. We believe that the people who are more capable to lead us, the people who we enjoy working with, are those individuals that portray these descriptions. So thanks for sharing that.
So that idea of emotional intelligence is something that we actually wanted to test and to research to see its relevancy in really the world out there. And in particular, it has to do with work. And so we actually ran a survey at the end of last year, which was on the state of emotional intelligence in the workplace. And that we'll give you a link to that later if you're not familiar with it. But we surveyed over about 1,000 people from 59 different countries and across numerous different industries, from healthcare to finance to technology to education to government, and also from many different sizes of organizations, from 1 to 50 people all the way through to very large, mid to large size companies with over 10,000 employees. And 85% of the respondents agreed that emotional intelligence is a critical skill for the near future. So that was just based on our kind of own research. But we also know that, for example, the World Economic Forum, when they talk about the future of work, they talk about the critical 10 skills that are going to be important for the future of work. And as you can see, emotional intelligence is also in that list. Just alongside things like analytical thinking and analysis and complex problem solving, we also see this skill of emotional intelligence. Another set of research from Capgemini across a number of different countries suggests, in fact, that as the world and the workforce changes, as we start to see more artificial intelligence and automation coming in to work, we also see a need for increased emotional intelligence, and that's across executives across all these different countries, which averages out. Each country is different, of course, but all of them say it's important. If you aggregate it, it's about 74% of executives believe that as the workplace changes and as AI and automation comes in, we will increasingly need these human-centered skills to be able to connect. So the good news about all of this is that mindfulness and emotional intelligence are skills, and like all skills, you can develop them. They are trainable. And when we talk about emotional intelligence, we talk about these 4 domains, the ones that are focused on yourself or the self-awareness and self-management, as well as the other focused skills of social awareness and relationship management. And all of those skills, from our perspective and from our research and from our kind of approach of understanding this from a neuroscience perspective, all of those skills are operationalized through mindfulness, the set of mental habits and practices that we collectively call mindfulness.
And in addition to everything that Rich has shared, the question we wanted to answer is why? Why are human-centered skills of emotional intelligence, of mindfulness, so important? And why today? And if we reflect back in our history, especially at work, we realize that we're experiencing a shift. And it's a shift of great importance as we go into what's called the 4th industrial revolution, right? So going from the industrial economy, where people were hiring hands, people working with their physical skills, to the knowledge economy, where they were hiring minds. And now people hiring hearts, really people who can be committed and engaged at work. And there was a New York Times article that talked about this, and it's called From Hands to Heads to Hearts. And it talks about how those companies that can put connection and human-centered skills at the center of what they do are the ones that will be the enduring winners, right? So really highlighting the importance of that shift across history and what's next for us. So we couldn't agree more with this. Based on all our own research, the trends that we're seeing, our own experience, we truly believe that human-centered skills are required to future-proof an organization, any organization. These skills are no longer optional, they're required. And when we talk about the future, we're not thinking about something that will happen in 20 years, in a couple of decades. We're really talking about what has already started in this new era. So there are many reasons we could share with you, a lot of research, many different trends, but today we're going to focus on 3. The first one is related to stress and burnout. The second one is related to connection and belonging, especially in this more disconnected world that we live in. And the third one is the emergence of a new type of leadership, a new type of human-centered leadership. And these three pillars, let's say, span across individuals, teams, and organizations. So Rich is going to share with us a little bit more about stress and burnout.
Yeah, and if we really think about stress and burnout in the context of the contemporary moment and the world we live in, one could say that we live in this, what we like to call a VUCA world. It's not a term that we developed. It actually comes from, a couple of decades now of kind of the changing nature of, this came from like what warfare was like in the last 2 decades, but it's a term that has kind of gotten a lot of currency to describe, generally speaking, the world in which we inhabit, which is, it's volatile. So it's very changeable. Things can swing very quickly. The uncertainty is pretty widespread because we don't always know the answers or even the causes of certain problems. It's complex because the solutions to address some of these challenges are really complex and combinatorial. And it's ambiguous because, again, it's not known necessarily what's on the other side of, some of these very large problem sets that we're confronting. For example, if we just take stress, we know that in the current reality, not only were things stressful before the pandemic, because we already saw high levels of stress and burnout in organizations, for example, but the pandemic exacerbated those. And not only that within organizations, but in the world itself. The pandemic itself is the cause of major stress and anxiety, acute uncertainty, and then also the way that we came through or experienced the pandemic and still experience it, right? Being much more isolated than ever before. It's a moment when all of humanity experienced this massive, massive challenge, disruption, tragedy, however you want to frame it, but it is something that affected us all. And in particular, with regard to stress and burnout, we know from some of the research that, for example, here in the US, 53% of adults report that at least one negative effect on their mental health and well-being of the pandemic and what's happened as a result of that. We also know that different populations are affected disproportionately by the pandemic. We know young people, perhaps that are not in a family system, but can be more isolated, racial and ethnic minorities, unpaid caregivers. All of these different populations are even more adversely affected. And even just yesterday, a research survey came out from the Conference Board suggesting that 70% of workers experienced burnout during the pandemic because of working remotely. So it's kind of one could even say it's a second pandemic of stress and mental health. In our own study, again, of over 1,000 people, 59 countries, we found that folks reported that 65% of them reported that their workloads increased, revenues decreased, the demands increased, the kind of demand for productivity also increased, while their workloads also increased, because in some ways remote work enabled kind of less friction of having to get into an office. So more work kind of came down the pipe. So we also know when we looked across the different dimensions of what were priorities for organizations in the same study, again, 59 countries, many, many different sectors, many sizes of organizations, collectively, what we saw was that dealing with uncertainty was kind of the number one priority for organizations over the next 12-month period. But I also want to point out, if you look at number 2, 3, 4, and 5, these are all human level or human dimension problems or challenges that organizations face and that they are prioritizing over the next few months and years. Now, burnout, and the reason for that is because burnout is an official diagnosis now from the World Health Organization. And if you dive a little bit deeper into that, and you look at some of the Gallup's survey research and survey intelligence information, what they found was that employees who experience burnout are much more likely to take a sick day, 63% more likely, 23% more likely to visit an emergency room, and also 2.5 or more percent likely, 2 times more likely to look for another job when they experience this condition of burnout in the workplace. So that's the bad news. But there is some good news as well. Well, one last thing on the bad news is that 30% of work-related illness is due to stress, and it cost $6.6 billion, and that was in 2017. So the problem's only exacerbated now. All right, so that's the bad news. The good news here is that we know that evidence suggests that there are ways to address this. And there are ways that you can support, individuals can be supported and can develop tools and practices themselves. And a lot of it centers on emotional intelligence and mindfulness, exactly to address some of these questions or challenges around stress, anxiety, et cetera. So as you see here, in some studies now that are long-standing, we've known this for a long time, because if you look at those studies, these are long studies that have been around for a while, but we know that employees who are able to effectively access and practice mindfulness skills, for example, have greater resilience and well-being. They have higher immune responses, so they're better buffered against stress and the like, and they have higher job satisfaction compared to control groups. That was then, and we also know that in a use case of one of our, if not our largest client, which is SAP, we know that when we look longitudinally, which means over time, at the results of mindfulness and emotional intelligence skill development in a large global organization like SAP, we actually have data to show that it has a really positive impact. So this is over a 6-month period. You could see that when employees are able to acquire and practice the skills of mindfulness and emotional intelligence, they report on average a 9.2% increase in well-being, meaning, and then you see the figures for everything else, the decrease in stress, but also the increase in things like engagement and quality of relationship, quality of communication, quality of collaboration. So this is actually a use case of, in this case, 650 employees when this study was done. And I know SAP is doing much broader studies, but I think it's important to point out that the idea that mindfulness and emotional intelligence can positively impact the well-being plus of employees is not just the theory, it's actually evidence-based. And we have our own evidence. So whenever we offer our curriculum and our trainings and our programs, we do sort of pre-post analysis. And we know that before programs and then after programs, there is a very significant increase in this particular dimension. We just pulled one dimension of many that we survey of people saying that they're able to now acquire tools to help calm themselves when they experience stressful situations. And this data is across a 6,100 size sample set across many different countries. Over 22 countries, I think, we have represented in this survey intelligence now. So there are evidence-based approaches that we can take to develop these skills to have positive impact on things like well-being and resilience.
That's right, Rich. And I want to call out the comment that Denise made. She said that they were just in an all-hands meeting at Nike, and those priorities are exactly what leadership is focusing on this upcoming year. So yeah, it's not just us who are thinking about what's next in terms of skills, important skills at work. And let's talk about the second reason, and it's related to connection and belonging, especially in this with a more disconnected world, right? As humans, we're social species, and connection is basic to our needs, and it's really important to build trust and to build psychological safety in a group. Some of you may be familiar with this. There was a study at Google that wanted to answer this question: which dynamics lead to higher team performance? Which dynamics lead to higher team performance? And if we think about this question, many ideas can come to mind, right? We can think about the size of the team, or how long has been the team working together, or how experienced is the leader, right? There are a lot of different dynamics that we can think about. But what they came up with and what they found in this particular case was that psychological safety was the number one predictor of team performance. Psychological safety. And we think of psychological safety as that ability of members of a group feeling connected, feeling safe to take risks, and being okay being vulnerable. So real important to think about the psychological safety of your team. And if you look at the other skills, you can also see that many of them are related to human-centered skills and emotional intelligence, like dependability, being able to have a sense of impact and meaning. In our own research, we also found that the skills that matter for team success, when we asked that question to our participants, the skill that came first was collaboration. Collaboration, even above productivity. It's really noticing here how different teams are recognizing the importance of connection, collaboration, working together. However, in a study done by Cigna in March of 2020, it showed that 61%, or close to 97 million workers in the United States, felt lonely at work. 61%. And think about what has happened ever since March of 2020, right? No doubt that it is higher since the pandemic started. An article published in HBR written by Daniel Goleman, who's famous for his work on emotional intelligence. So Daniel Goleman and his colleagues state that based on their research, which they've compiled over a number of years, high levels of emotional intelligence create climates in which information sharing, trust, healthy risk-taking, and learning can flourish. And low levels of emotional intelligence can create climates rife with fear and anxiety. And in this article, they mention that potentially tense or fearful employees could potentially generate short-term results, right? But they cannot be sustainable. Sustainable high performance within a team requires establishing connection, trust, and strong interpersonal skills. And as an organization at SIYLI, we believe in the importance of human-centered skills, as you can see, because we think it's the right approach in any working environment, period. However, we're frequently asked to share the impact of these skills on the bottom line. So here's one stat that is coming from a Deloitte and Google analysis. And in this particular study, they found that organizations that prioritize collaboration are twice as likely to be profitable and twice as likely to outgrow competitors. Obviously, two metrics that are key for any business to survive and to thrive. Another factor that is crucial for businesses to grow and succeed is innovation, no doubt about it. And I just love this quote by Brené Brown that says, vulnerability is the absolute heartbeat of innovation and creativity. There can be zero innovation without vulnerability, right? So think about that in your own working environment. How vulnerable can you be at work? And if we think about innovation, when you're trying to innovate, you have to question what is the status quo. You have to be resilient when something doesn't work. Failure is obviously part of any innovative process. You have to be okay pushing back on people who don't want you to continue working on a specific route, right? You have to be okay sharing your own quote unquote crazy ideas, being okay listening to others' ideas. You have to be okay exposing your own creativity. And this is usually done in a team, right? So first, in order for innovation to happen, the team has to begin with connection, with psychological safety, with trust, with being okay being yourself, with being okay sharing something without fear of retaliation. And another critical aspect of connection and psychological safety has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know there's a lot of information and research on this topic. And once again, it's not just the right thing to do, because it is the right thing to do, but as we think about specifically how it has an impact on business results, there's a lot of evidence that provides that information. One study in particular done by McKinsey, and was done with 366 public companies, That study found that those companies in the top quartile for ethnic and racial diversity in management were 37% more likely to have a financial return above their industry mean, right? So those companies in the top quartile for ethnic and racial diversity were more likely to have a return above average within their particular industry. But we know that just presence of diversity is not enough. Teams need human-centered skills in order to truly be able to enable inclusion, to take advantage of that diversity, and to make sure that all the voices are heard and welcome equally. And as Rich has mentioned, all of these skills can be trained. And here's one example of empathy, a critical skill when it comes to building psychological safety, to building teams that can perform. And in our own Search Inside Yourself program, as we always do, our pre and post analysis, we were able to find that people who took the program increased on this particular skill, the question related to what we show here on this slide, they increased their ability by 13%. And the question was, before giving someone feedback, I tried to imagine how I would feel if I were in his or her place. So really being able to put yourself in the shoes of another person. And that ability can be trained, right? This is a fundamental skill to build connection at work.
Great, thank you so much, Carolina. And I want to now talk about the third aspect of really enabling human-centered skills in organizations, which is leadership. And by the way, we've been sharing a lot of information with you. And so I do think we'll probably have some time at the end for some Q&A. And to do so, please just send your questions across on chat or raise your hand, and we'll get to those hopefully at the end, because I think we'll have some time. But back to the idea that leaders are a critical aspect. As we know from research and for a long time now, that emotionally intelligent leaders are one of the key aspects of what drives motivation, creativity, and satisfaction, as you see in this article. But we also, know from our own research, or actually, if I talk about some other research out there from Inc., we know that if you think about the younger generation of employees, what are they looking for? We know that they're looking for what I would say leaders who themselves possess human-centered skills. So we talked about emotional intelligence, but we can also talk about these things. In this Inc. article, it's interesting to see that what millennials are really seeking in leaders is mentoring, which is entirely based on relationship quality, right? As well as things like authenticity. So to be authentic, as Carolina shared in Brene Brown's estimation, it takes the ability to be vulnerable as a leader, to be honest and transparent, open and vulnerable. Not easy for some leaders, right? It's a skill. And again, like all skills, we can develop that. Also demonstrating integrity. And finally, a gentle spirit. Now, I know that there's a lot you could probably try to parse or kind of try to understand about what does that mean exactly. And I don't think we'll have the time to really dive into that. That's probably a whole webinar in itself. But the idea is that a gentle spirit, as well as all of these aspects of leadership that millennials are looking for, again, are at the human level, right? None of these bubbles here are saying they are off the charts geniuses with IQs in above, whatever certain range is. What millennials and the next generation are looking for are these human-centered skills in their leaders. And so even in our own research, again, if I go back to the study that we did across those 59 countries, about those 1,000 participants who participated in this, what we see that for organizational success, healthy leadership is critical. It is one of the top 6 dimensions that respondents reported as being really important for their organizations to succeed, emotionally healthy leadership. I do also want to point out, to the point that I made before, that if you look at actually all of these dimensions here, these top 6 that we sort of aggregated based on the survey that we ran, that 5 of the 6 are human-centered, right? Employee engagement, talent retention, mission delivery, helping people connect to the purpose of the organization, and future readiness, helping prepare the workforce to have the skills and the qualities to succeed in the future. And of course, there's the financial stability piece. So I think it's really important to point out that the human-centered skills and leadership are critical throughout. And I'll send it over to Carolina, and this is kind of the final why on it.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think we've mentioned to you different reasons why this is so important. So important. We truly believe in it. And it is critical for organizations in order for them to adapt to this new world that I am sure we all agree is changing, is shifting, to survive as organizations, to stay competitive, and to thrive, to flourish within our own industries and regions. There's a quote here by the president of Four Seasons Hotels that says, "The evolution of the modern workplace requires a paradigm shift and a disruption of the status quo." In our view, this necessary disruption will be driven by a renewed and bashed focus on the power of emotional intelligence. And there's actually a really interesting study that they've done on why emotionally intelligent employees can help more and perform better in something like the hospitality industry, like Four Seasons. So this is a recap of the 3 reasons we talked about. We talked about why current levels of stress and burnout are costly, are unsustainable to the individual, and also the impact to the economy, the impact to organizations and their profitability, their performance. We also talked about the importance of connection and belonging, diversity and inclusion, the importance of feeling vulnerable, of psychological safety, in order for teams to be able to perform and for organizations to thrive. And lastly, we talked about the new demands of leaders, right? New generations, actually, they leave organizations, and we've heard this before, right? You don't leave a job, you leave your boss, right? So when it comes to leadership, the importance of emotionally intelligent leaders, emotionally intelligent organizations that inspire other teams and that can truly make it worthwhile for people to stay and attract talent and perform better, right? Provide direction, inspired, all of those attributes that you mentioned at the beginning of our webinar. So with that, more than ever, emotional intelligence is not just a nice to have, but a core capability of the future, is a quote that we would like to leave you with. And before finishing, we also want to talk about the how, right? So we talked about 3 reasons why this is so important. And then the next question can be, well, how do we do it? What do we do about it? And that's when we say, well, we're here to help. We're here to support you. At SIYLI, we've been working with lots of different organizations in every continent, in lots of different cities and countries around the world. And we offer different types of programs that can truly help to train teams and individuals on these really important skills. So going from resilience to emotional intelligence, mindfulness, leadership, and many, many more. So if this is something you're interested in, we would love to talk to you. And if all of this information was helpful and you would like to learn a little bit more, we would like to invite you to check out our new ebook that has all the research we mentioned, all the stats and graphs, and many more. And you can download it at this URL right here. And anyone who registered to the webinar will be able to get it via email. But if you didn't register, feel free to download it for sure. And of course, the invitation to connect with us, right? We would love to chat with you and learn a little bit more about your organization's needs. We would be happy to schedule a free consultation with one of our team members where we can share more about what has worked in organizations within your industry, within your geography, and what would be some good ways to partner together to strengthen human-centered skills in your organization. So with that, we would like to thank you. And I love it because we do now have time for questions. And feel free to share your questions via the chat if you're on Zoom or through social media, and we'd be happy to address them.
I see earlier also Dionisio Mabalot had raised his hand. So maybe we can start there. Dionisio, did you have a question? Can we unmute?
Let's see. I don't see your name, but there we go. You are welcome to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, I'm okay. Thank you so much.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Okay, great. Maybe it was by mistake. That's okay. I do see that Sabrina. Oh my gosh, Sabrina Williams. Hello.
Hello. I was literally just saying hello and well done. This is so needed in these crazy times and turbulent times that we're living in. So thank you for doing this important work.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. Thank you for sharing that. Great.
And what a cute pic. What a cute pic.
I know. I love your picture.
The little one.
Yeah, that's not me. That would be hilarious if that was him talking.
So sweet, though. So sweet.
Okay, I see another raised hand. Aubrey, I am going to ask you to unmute.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing what you did. That was just what I needed to hear today. As I listened to you, and the question that popped into my head is, I really am interested in learning more about your personal journeys in becoming both EQ and mindfulness leaders and trainers. I wonder if you could share with us, because this is something that you've done for many, many years, it sounds like. What were some of the phases that you went through?
What a great question. I'm happy to start. So early in my own education, honestly, like the first year of university was where I really kind of came across these practices. And for me, they were sort of like game changing or world changing. It literally changed kind of like my view on the world, where I could actually get some kind of perspective on all of the thoughts, emotions, understandings I had about who I was and what I cared about when I learned how to do things like meditation. And also I had some body-centered mindfulness practices that really had to do with a lot with, for example, martial arts and yoga. Ways for me to kind of shift different perspectives. And those stayed with me throughout my adult life to this very day, right? They kind of became what I like to call personal hygiene factors. Meaning that there are things that I need to do to just stay well and to stay resilient. And really from that time when I would say 18 years old, and I learned these practices through every phase, right? Through when I finished college and I traveled around the world and I went to graduate school and then started working in industry for the 15 plus years I worked in industry, whether financial services or tech. These practices were something I did on a pretty much daily basis and still do. And so I think that was sort of the pivotal moment for me when I sort of had the first experience of these practices. And one of the things that I love, I came here to the Institute because I really believe in and love and hopefully live or aspire to live these practices. One of the things I really love about what we offer is that we offer accessibility. We offer kind of like a way to start doing these practices if you're not familiar with them, that are really practical and accessible on a daily basis, that are rooted in science as well, which is important for me at least, and for many of our stakeholders. And if you are somebody who is familiar with these, they also offer the continuity and the capacity to kind of go deeper with these skills, which I appreciate. So I would say that the two kind of big milestones that I would highlight are kind of when I learned and began, and how we can use kind of the very approaches that we teach, like even now. So for me, it's decades later, and I still find huge value in the very practices that we teach. I still practice the very practices that we teach on pretty much a daily basis. But Carolina, I'm curious, like, what's your own journey?
Oh, such an interesting one. Well, yes, I think it all started for me when I experienced a pretty severe case of burnout when I was at work. And this coincided with a time when I was going through something difficult personally, a divorce. And at that time, everything kind of came together, and I pretty much hit rock bottom, and I wanted to find tools and ways to go back to living a thriving, flourishing life. And that's when I started to do a lot of research and to experiment with my own life, like what works. And at that time, I was working at Google, and I found the Search Inside Yourself program. A lot of people were talking about it. There used to be a really long wait list for it, and I signed up for it without knowing much about what the program entailed. And I absolutely loved it. So much so that then I decided to become a certified teacher, and eventually decided to quit my job and join the organization full time. And the reason why this is so important to me is because it not only helped me personally, but I could see the difference in my interactions at work. I could see how I was able to be a better leader, and how I was able to start influencing and talking to other people about the importance of these skills. And also calling out the importance of talking about mental health at work. And we talked about psychological safety and the importance of really being able to talk about this and to share your full self and to be your full self at work. And so those are real important. And I became passionate about bringing more of those skills to more places around the world, to more organizations. So here we are. That's what brought me here. And tied to that, I'm seeing a question from another participant saying, what would be the key attributes of an emotionally intelligent leader? What would be some of the key attributes? And I think the answer to that goes back to our definition of emotional intelligence, right? So someone who first is self-aware, and it starts with that, with the self. So self-awareness, knowing yourself, knowing your talents, knowing your skills, knowing your weaknesses and those areas that you're still working on, and really being able to connect with your inner wisdom. So self-knowledge. And then once you have that skill, then self-management, being able to regulate your emotions, to connect with your emotions, to gather information from those emotions. And we always teach that emotions always bring information. And so being able to gather insights from that. And from there, being able to develop and strengthen your interpersonal skills, right? How you relate with other people. And then from there, that's when you have all of those attributes that we talked about at the beginning, and you are better able to relate with yourself and with others.
Yeah, I want to add to that too, Carolina, just that those are, I think, the important attributes and outcomes of emotional intelligence, and the practice to get you there and the skill development process is really, really important, right? Like you can't have the skill unless you exercise the skill. You have to grow and develop the skill. So what kind of practices and tools are we using to do that? I think is a central question. And there is, I saw in chat, like, what do you recommend for yourself, for leaders, to what kind of skills, how often, how long? And there's a lot of research on this, right? If we're talking about the skills of, for example, mindfulness and self-awareness, some research suggests, up to 8 minutes a day. But we even know that even shorter forms can be very helpful, right? We know that, for example, certain focused attention exercises in the space of 1 minute can start to bring online the parasympathetic nervous system, the kind of quieting response where our kind of frazzled and stressed brains and bodies can kind of quiet down so we can have that mental stability and clarity in the space of 1 minute. There are other studies that suggest we can actually affect really strong changes in our brain with much longer duration practices, right? From 18 to 40 minutes a day. So for a number of days a week. So there's a range of answers to the question of how much, but I think the critical thing is what works best for you, right? And if you can bring in some of these practices, maybe you only have a window to do 30 to 60 seconds of practice, that's useful. If you have a longer window to do 8 minutes of these practices and tools, that's also useful. If you have the ability to go longer, that's also useful. And sometimes they happen in more condensed periods. Personally, I can share that I go away for like silent retreats twice a year, a short one and a long one. At least that was before the pandemic. I've done those online now, and I'm happy to say we're coming back to that as well. So I just want to emphasize the importance of skill development and practice on a regular basis if we're looking for the outcomes of emotional intelligence. It's a process of developing skill. So,
and along those lines, Rich, we have a question here from Nikolai, and he says, what's the best way to measure EQ? Any recommendations on what to use? What would be your answer to that, especially if we think about the workplace at work?
yeah, so there's many different models of EQ, and there's state models, trait models, and ability models. So I don't mean to geek out too much as a psychologist, but there's different ways you can understand EQ. But what I would say is this, that the best measure of EQ is a measure that takes into account the perspectives of others whom you impact, right? Because I can kind of say all day long how much EQ I believe I have, but the true measure of that will really be kind of a multi-rater view on that. So there's a number of multi-rater EQ assessments that are out there that I encourage you to explore. And then if you really want to get super scientific about it, you'll have to do other types of measures that are super, super long and not conducive, for example, to the business contexts. So it really just depends on like what purpose. Are you running an academic study? Are you looking for effective EI in the workplace? If it's the latter, for example, yeah, I would use a multi-rater type of assessment of EQ, or simply do a survey. Look at your employee, and if you can't, I also realize that adding additional assessments into people's busy schedule is hard, but there are some things that naturally happen in organizations often as part of what I would call the rhythm of the business that are assessment oriented. Carolina, you remember at Google, we had employee well-being surveys, we had manager upward feedback surveys. So in both of those, for example, which are just a part of what employee engagement surveys, right? A lot of organizations run those. So when you start to look at the data from that, focused on, for example, upward feedback, what did the team members say about a manager? You could start to parse levels of emotional intelligence. So without adding anything to people's already busy schedule, you can just parse that data, or you can bring in some of these multi-rater assessments that I'm talking about.
That's great. And I would just add that if you're thinking about doing this within the working environment, it's quite important to also have a conversation with teams and identify what are some of the business related metrics that you're interested in exploring further, right? What are you trying to impact? And in many of the organizations that we work with, they talk about the employee engagement scores, or how many people are absent, turnover, right? So what are you trying to do? What's the purpose if you were to tie it to your business objectives, and then make sure that you can measure it that way. So lots of different ways of doing it. And I also wanted to call out here a comment that says, simply beginning with a moment to arrive, like we did at the beginning of the webinar, I found so incredibly useful. For many years, I've wished that all the meetings began with this moment to check in and get grounded before beginning. Thank you so much, India, for sharing that comment. It's actually something we do at the Institute and that we share with all the organizations we work with. And we're humans. We are changing contexts all the time. We need to ground ourselves, connect before we're able to have even like a productive meeting. So thank you for that comment. Thank you for sharing that. We also experience that. So not only do we know it from our research, but we know it empirically as well, because we practice it together.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good questions also coming into the chat. And I don't know if you're seeing any other hands raised, but I want to talk about this very last one that Fernando shared, which is around where to get started and how do we approach organizations where, for example, leadership is not really focused on this, expects high performance, but is not really invested in well-being and things like emotional intelligence. So where to get started? Our experience around that is always that there's a false distinction between high performance and things like emotional intelligence. They're not two separate things. Can you get high performance out of kind of asking people to just grind and to kind of like work until they're utterly exhausted? You probably can, but it's short term. Longer term business results and sustainable high performance really has to do, again, with these skills. And so I think making the business case, for example, to leaders that emotional intelligence, for example, and mindfulness can improve things like innovation and employee engagement and employee retention, and also kind of bottom line implications of that, is a great place to start the conversation. So for example, at SAP, that use case that I shared with you, they know that for every 1 percentage point increase in employee well-being, it usually equates to, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of like around 70 million euros in operating profit, right? So every 1% improvement in employee well-being results in millions and millions of euros in operating profit. Why is that? Because employees get less sick. They are retained at a much higher rate. So there's not the cost of having to recruit employees who quit because they're stressed and burnt out, and many other factors such as that contribute, that well-being contributes to. And what contributes to well-being are these practices around mindfulness and emotional intelligence. So that's kind of how to position the theory of the case, but back it with data. There's lots of data out there. We shared some of it. We also have an ebook that I think we shared the link to, but if not, you can certainly find it on our website that has a lot of these studies as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Rich. I'm seeing a lot of questions related to that, right? How do you present the case in your organization? How do you influence leadership? How do you influence HR? Or if you are within HR, how do you make this a priority? So absolutely using data, tying it to your business objectives, and requesting budget for it, right? Allocating the space and the time and the resources on skills that, as we said, are a priority now.
I have to make one more comment. I forgot to mention this. Also, go to the point of least resistance. So we've seen people in organizations, some leaders are absolutely allergic to these ideas that we're sharing here, but some leaders actually personally are invested in these ideas. Some leaders will be your champions. So if we go back to the use case of SAP, our champion there was a man named Peter Bosselman, who found a very senior executive, right? He was an engineering director at the time. He found a very senior executive who loved to do this stuff. And he proposed to do it within his business unit. And then it got huge interest. And then it expanded from there to the point where now I think SAP has trained over 13,000 employees, and they're like 120,000 globally, I think. So that's like 10% of their workforce on these tools. And it started with one person who was enthusiastic about it, who found another person who happened to be a senior executive who sponsored it. And they got traction there, and then it started to ripple out across the organization. So I would just encourage you to find the point of least resistance and start to work from there.
For sure. And I would just close by saying that we're here to help you. And we, as you can tell, we're quite passionate about these topics and about bringing these skills to as many organizations as possible. We truly believe in the importance of making our workplaces more human. And I say workplaces because now that the meaning of that word has changed so much, right? So as we continue to evolve, as we continue to overcome the crisis that we just experienced globally, this is going to be more important than ever before. And we have many of the tools, the resources, the case studies to help you make your case in your organization. So please connect with us. We would love to hear from you. And we hope to see you at our next webinar or in a different program. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.